Welcome to the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. I am your host, Sarah Smith. I am a practicing rural family physician and the charting coach. This is the podcast for physicians and advanced practice providers who are ready to step back from the busyness of their clinical day to share ideas, question everything, and redesign their clinical day. We are redesigning clinical medicine to create sustainable clinical days and create time for our lives outside of medicine. Join us for discussions with world experts who are helping design sustainable models of clinical medicine and the physicians or clinicians who have discovered or designed sustainable models of clinical medicine for themselves. Hi, everybody, and thank you so much for coming back. So this is one of the I haven't met you in person, but we have had many conversations, and I have been inside the program of Dr. Tonya Caylor's program for the joy of family medicine to help some of the physicians that she helps within her sphere of influence. And so I'm so delighted to have her on the podcast because we're going to do a bit of a dive into the things that she's experienced herself in medicine and the things she's helping right now with physicians and clinicians inside their clinical days. So I'm going to let you introduce yourself. Welcome.
Thank you, Sarah. Yeah, so I'm Tonya Caylor. I'm a family physician and academic physician coach up in Anchorage, Alaska. And so basically, I have the opportunity to have learned lots of ways that practice worked for me and did not work for me over the last 24 years or so.
Lovely. So you're up in Alaska. How long have you been there for?
16 years.
Wow. And where had you come from before that?
Florida.
Florida. So it's a little bit of a difference in climate.
Just a touch.
And tell us your story. So you are family medicine background. Mm-hmm. Tell us about that. How did you end up there?
Well, I really thought I was going to end up, I interviewed for medical school and said I was going to be a pediatric cardiologist. That kind of came out of the clear blue. But kind of a common story that we hear, like I went through and I loved every rotation, right? I'm probably unique in that pediatrics was probably my least favorite. And so I looked at, all my different options, ended up with family medicine because I loved sports medicine, adolescent medicine, women's health, and being the primary care person, right? The primary care physician to kind of walk through with patients and their family. So that's what led me into family medicine.
Okay. Yeah. Very good. Tell us about the things that you experienced on that journey towards becoming family doctor and your work as a attending.
Yeah. So there's some contrasting things, like looking back, now I can see kind of parallel tracks of things that helped and things that were not helpful. And one track has to do with the system, and one track has to do with what's within my control. And so early on, I was in a large multi-specialty physician-owned group. And that was my first job, and loved it, actually. It was well-run, well-oiled machine. But then I got to experience specialists voting us out of the practice because primary care doctors were, quote, money losers, even though all of their referrals came from us. Anyway, it's just wild to kind of see that. So that was one thing that was kind of interesting about the system. And then from there, we sold ourselves to a for-profit entity who was looking at churning out lots of money from us, which changed our appointment slots, and having somebody sit across from me telling me I need to bill for more EKGs, right? That kind of thing. The part of my control in that very first job was I loved having flexibility, and they allowed that in the beginning. I needed to work through lunch. I don't recommend this for a long period of time, but given the circumstances, I needed to work through lunch so I could drop my kids off and pick them up because I was traveling out of town to work. And so they went with me. And I loved having the flexibility. I loved having an MA that I hired. I got to interview, and she set up her practice to mimic mine. So she also worked through lunch, and she also enjoyed that. Now, obviously that wasn't going to be sustainable. That was just to bridge a gap for about a 2-year gap. And then after that, when suddenly I had somebody telling me I needed to build differently and practice differently, e- even though I adjusted back to a normal, like having a lunch schedule, um, the joy kind of been sucked down a little bit, right? So part
Mm.
of it was them, and then part of it was me not knowing how to advocate or make adjustments. And so I ended up not knowing what to do with all the mom guilt, which was the other big thing that I had no tools. I didn't even understand. Um, and didn't have any mentors. I think that's a big thing. I didn't have any mentors. I had kids that were physicians to tell me how to navigate that. So I thought, you know what, I just need to leave and take care of my kids and figure out how to keep my clinical skills up so I have more time with them. And so I did that and ended up in just a wonderful chain of events, helping open and run and serve clinically in an indigent care clinic for those people who fell through the cracks. And this was before the Affordable Care Act here in the U.S. So there were many people there, although there still are. Um, and that was so rewarding. I was back to enjoying, helping and establishing relationships. And the charting was easy because we used, uh, well, we actually used some paper charts and then Amazing Charts, which is a physician built system that worked pretty well. Um, and so those are kind of the couple of things there. The next kind of phase was being a core faculty up in Alaska when we moved up here. And again, I was thrilled. I knew I wanted to get into academics when we were in Florida. And so when I found out that they had an opening here, I was excited. And I loved every single hat I wore. Um, the parts that I can own were, I had no idea that perfectionism was not a wonderful quality that we should maximize. I had no idea that it's okay to leave some check boxes unchecked. Um, and somewhere along the line, I became overly reliant on needing other people to tell me I was doing a good job. So it's kind of like I just needed more and more and more and more of that, and I had lost the ability to validate the work I was doing for myself. So those three things really were three large things that culminated eventually in my burnout. Now, that to be said, academic medicine in and of itself has lots of opportunities to challenge us, right? In the system wide, caring for really complex patients with limited resources. And there's so much need that
Mhm.
even if you're not even worried about making money and keeping the business open, even if you don't even care about that piece, the need outstripped what we could offer, right? And so they're packing patients in to meet the need. And so that also weighed, on the difficulty. And I think that's something that we still face. But yeah, those things culminated in my ultimate burnout before I knew that was a term. And yeah, that's kind of my story to that point.
Yeah. I'm fascinated when you said well-run clinic. Let's take you back there before they kicked
Yeah.
you out. What made it well run? What do you think you put in the box that says, "Ooh, I like coming here. It's well run." So
Oh yeah.
we heard that you had the flexibility to kind of set your own um, hours of work and your own assistant. You got to hire her. What else? What else made it well run?
So we had this amazing office manager who set the culture of the place to be a positive, energetic, um, just a place that you look forward to seeing the people you worked with, right? There's a lot of connection. Um, she and our physician lead for our office site did a lot of unique things in figuring out how do we still connect with each other as physicians and yet meet the needs of the patient where we stagger our clinic times. And so we started having monthly physician meetings down the road, eating breakfast and having coffee to run our meetings, that it was regular and we had a chance to connect. And um, they were really good, especially early in my career, at helping me see the business aspect, right? Like we don't like to think about the business, or a lot of us in family medicine, we don't want to think about the business part, but it's really actually quite important if you want to keep your doors open, right? And so I got to see that piece of it, which was really helpful to me. Um, and so I think so, and then even things like our phone systems, like our, you know, even now I'll be on the hold for, I don't know, Walgreens, and I'm thinking, oh, I wish they need to fix their phone system, right? But we had even like down to the detail, our systems, how patients got slotted, how the front office was trained, just kind of top to bottom was really well run.
Mm-hmm. We talk a lot about the non-physician, non-clinician work and helping our team kind of offload some of that work for us. Is that part of what you mean by a well-run team there?
Oh yeah, for sure. I guess I didn't mention that. This was back in like 99. So we were kind of, we had cutting edge practices in my mind that there's still places here that don't have them. Like we had standing orders for refills, right? Mm-hmm. If they've had this and this and this, say yes, you don't have to go through the doctor to get the approval. And so just those kind of things we didn't have originally, but we developed feedback systems. Like if we weren't getting reports back, and they were empowered to go track those down for us to make sure that we got them. And I didn't have to be keeping things in my box to make, like I was worried that I'm not going to get that result, right? Yes. So yeah, I think a lot of really unique things about offloading things that didn't have to be done by a physician. Of course, also at the time, and I will say this changed with regulations in the US, I could also at that point walk out and say, I need you to order a CBC da 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 and bill it under fatigue, right? I didn't have to look up a code. I didn't have to like check a CBC box. And so, that was something that worked well that has been lost because of regulation.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so there's some further system things that have been added that may make that system not be as easy to recreate now, but was very helpful at the time. Yeah. It's nice to find those little gems, because as we move further along, we forget some of the things that made it maybe easier earlier, and then figuring out how do we get those back in. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so fascinating. Okay, then you were not... You were money losers. Tell me about that identity shift.
Ooh, it was really kind of, it threw me for a loop, right? These are, over, like a 3-year period or so, the specialists that I got to know and trust, and like, they took good care of my patients, and I felt that I gave good referrals. In fact, one of the pulmonologists called me and thanked me for always doing a good job of getting things together and sending appropriate referrals, right? So it was just like so much dissonance. Like you seem like really good, nice people, and you're taking care of my patients, and then you're booting us out of the practice. Did I miss something? Like, did we forget to have some conversations around this? It's really interesting because the younger generation of us were like, all right, we are not going to refer to them anymore. And two things. One, the older generation who've been around with all these doctors for years, they didn't change their referral patterns at all. Those of us younger, we tried, but darn, it's really hard to build up a new referral set, right? And you're like, all right. And so in the end, if you look just from a financial standpoint, they made a brilliant decision for their bottom lines, right? So I'm not sure that it felt very ethical, or, it didn't feel good for us.
Yeah, there would have been some conversations with peers about your worthiness within that moment, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of a blur. I think we were all kind of just taken aback. And I talked about the culture of the place, and I think, I haven't thought of that, but we were not a group of venters. Mm-hmm. I won't say that we like compartmentalized and didn't like process it. We talked about it, but we didn't walk around angry. And as I'm looking back, I'm thinking, wow, that is because like we had such a culture that it was safe and we could talk to each other. And it was like, what is that going to accomplish if we just come to work and are angry all the time? Which is really interesting because that may not be how I showed up as core faculty for a little bit there.
Yeah, fair enough. I like that you had this community. I think community is so important. What did evening and weekend work look like back in the well-run practice? Were you taking much home?
No, not at all. I never took any work home. I would get to work. I would, well, two stages. At one stage, I would drop my daughter off at school, which was right down the road, and then zoom in, and my first patient was roomed. But after that little gap filling time, I would get to work early because my medical assistant always had little stickies next to her desk. And I would just go through and answer the questions that she had left for me. So I would do that first thing in the morning. So that was very helpful. And then I kind of prepped for my continuity patients on the fly because I'd gotten to know a lot of them pretty well. And so I would remind myself what I was doing right before I walked in, and then just prep for like when I'm seeing complicated patients for my partners or something in advance. So I'd eyeball my schedule the day before. But no, I didn't do any work. We had a call, which was basically phone call. And it was very light and very painless. And then we had, I think, like one out of every 6 weekends, we worked a Saturday urgent care kind of clinic. And that was actually kind of fun to me. So
yeah, got it. Okay, then you move over to the for-profit people.
yes.
And you get a lunch break.
Yep, I got my lunch break. And I was definitely working through lunch. So I probably still work. I still finish my work at home. I mean, at work. I didn't take work home. We were in a blended system. We still had some paper chart and some kind of early cutting edge electronic charting. It was a strange time. So it was harder, in other words, to do from home. And yeah, I think the biggest thing that changed was feeling this extra, like I remember being in the room with a 19-year-old who was studying for her exams, for her freshman year of college. And she had a migraine and she'd been taking, I don't know, drinking whatever energy drink or whatever it was back then, and not sleeping and cramming and having palpitations. And I thought, I could justify an EKG. And I was like, what? She's had no sleep. She's not, I can hear her heart. It's nice and regular. Like, I do not need an EKG on this person. She needs sleep. Right.
Yes.
And so the thought that it went through my mind bothered me a lot.
Right. Because you're getting to bill up item code for the EKG, which is then going towards the practice's amount of money that they're creating, which is helping their profit line.
Right. Because they said, that was the one they highlighted. They sat across my desk for me and said, like, just 3 more EKGs a week, you will be meeting your goal. I'm like, what?
Your goal.
Yeah. Like I didn't define that goal.
Right. Okay. So this is within this for-profit system. Tell me about you said you had no mentors who were demonstrating how to do this for you.
Yeah, as far as being a mom with a spouse or partner that was working full time as well, right? So I just knew that I felt like I was failing them. I think I felt pretty good about the medicine I was practicing, right? But I actually felt like I made, if a neighbor wanted to take them to go sign up for pottery class or something, I made that mean that they had to do it because their mom's a failure, right? And so I had I did not have the ability to look at myself and be proud of, you know, what I was demonstrating and how I was there and present. And so, yeah, not having mentors and feeling immense mom guilt.
Mm, got it. Okay. When do you think that the burnout started? When were you identifying burnout for you?
For me, it was as core faculty several years into it. Yeah, I think a couple of things that I remember really well is being really upset with a colleague. I was in charge of didactics, and we were doing this new model where, we'd have small groups in different rooms with different faculty, and we would take a small topic, right, and just kind of, you know, more of a adult learning style. And the key to that is we had to change rooms on time.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember being out of proportional upset at one of my friends and colleagues for taking too long in her section. But it was like over the top frustration, but I could see it. I was like, still angry at her and thinking, this isn't like me. Right. And so I was getting like little glimpses of things like that. Um, and then just coming home, and I was working at home at this point. I mostly got my charting and all of that done and basket messages done in the office, but that meant all my other faculty work, like didactic, organization and, writing curriculum and all those kind of things, those came home with me.
Mm.
So working hard from home, adding back into the mom guilt and right. And not being able to engage because I was exhausted.
Mm. Yeah. And then you're starting to see your facade, your external professional facade kind of breaking down a little bit with this external frustration at colleague.
Yes.
This
Yeah.
is
Oh
not
goodness.
me.
Yes. Oh, it was so bad. Yeah, it really got bad. It got to the point where even I remember like going to my in basket and I anticipating seeing things done wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So I went in with the lenses to say, let me find where somebody did something wrong so I can be
You
even
mucked
more
up this time.
unhappy. Yeah. Isn't that terrible? But yeah, it got pretty it was in a pretty negative place. And I also this was the straw that broke the camel's back, sort of to speak, was deciding that I am still going to check all those boxes. And so I do not have time to talk to my medical assistant about how her kid's doing. And I am not going to take lunch and sit anywhere other than my office. I'm not going to talk what we shared an office at this point. I'm not talking to the person behind me about her day. I don't have time for that. So I cut off all connection.
Mm-hmm.
And that was I didn't know the power of connection and how healthy it is for us. And that just kind of set up the cycle to being done.
Right. So interesting. So did anybody kind of poke at you and say, hey, Tonya, you're not yourself? Or was there anybody noticing?
Oh gosh, not directly. After the fact. So after I'd burned out and quit, um, even though I stayed on as on-call faculty, which I still am today, um, I did have a conversation with my program director about, my role and increasing, and he saying something along the lines of, I'm not sure that we would want that. And being so surprised, like, what, you wouldn't want me to be back more frequently? What? And he said, I think that I can't remember how he phrased it, something along like your complaining really was starting to affect people. And I was like, no. I am wired. I was like, defending myself. I am just wired to see what can be better. And I look and I'm like, yeah, let's make this better and let's make this better. And that's just how my mind works. And to his credit, he sat back and he said, huh, you know what? That's true. You've done that since day one. He said, but somewhere along the line, he said, it was like you were sitting next to me saying, we can do this better, and let's do this, and let's do this. At some point, you left my side, went across the table, and started pointing a finger at me saying, you better fix this, you better fix that. And he said, and it took more of a blaming.
Mm.
And I had always told residents to try on any feedback, right? And so I was like,
Mm.
oh, let me try that on. Oh, darn, it fits. But, it makes sense now, right? I was so burnt out and so negative, but I didn't see it. And when he gave me the feedback, I'd had enough space. And so I could try it on and be like, you know what? You're absolutely right. And I'm sorry.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, he was the first person that I think directly pointed out something to me.
Mm. Yeah. Fascinating. And so interesting that you're so busy and so like just trying to get all those tick boxes ticked and get home and do the best you can at home that you're like, somebody else fix that. I don't got time for that. But this needs fixing. I just need to give it to you.
Yeah.
I've got no room for that right now.
Yeah.
The straw that broke the camel's back. Yes.
And it's just that negativity bias, right? Like we all have it. And when we're stressed, behind on sleep, burnt out, it just really ramps up. And so, yeah, I probably couldn't have given you any kind of gratefulness practice at the time.
Tell me about perfectionism. What did perfectionism look like that was may have started with different intentions, but ended up causing you more harm or not joy?
Oh, goodness. I could get down into the weeds. Oh, man. I had a hard time staying in the big picture. So, like, let's just take um, Excel spreadsheet.
Mhm.
Because I had designed this elaborate system for each faculty and in their curricular role, the dates they had, the topics that they needed to get covered every 18 months. And so I do not know how much time I spent on Excel spreadsheets for 12 different faculty and looking at dates, and then you have to like move them around. And so like just offloading that to any one of our administrative assistants who would do that so much easier and faster than me would have been huge, right? Um, but there was part of that perfectionism is tied to some control, right? And so I'm like, no, I got to do it because I got to make sure it's right. So
Mhm.
that was one thing. But even like, gosh, PowerPoint slides and colors and fonts, and I want the picture to be this shape and this. Like, I could totally get into the weeds with really small things. Um, it also, I think, expanded. Like, I think I would have been a much more enjoyable and probably more effective attending. Um, but even letting the perfectionism bleed into my expectations of others, I had pretty darn high expectations.
Mhm.
Um, now, I would say that I still keep in touch with many of my former residents, and so I think I enjoyed a good relationship and a fairly good reputation. But it definitely bled into my approaches with them,
Mhm.
and I've grown a lot since then. And that gets tied into that external validation, right? Because now how I decided if it was perfect enough, I outsourced that. Like, but I wouldn't even ask for feedback. I just outsourced it and like, okay, is it perfect or is it not perfect? If they're not telling me it's perfect, then it wasn't. And so I went from being able to, give a lecture and get good feedback and really enjoy it to, you know, if only one or two people said it was a good job, then making that mean that it wasn't perfect and that I failed. And so I think unhealthy, I think maladaptive perfectionism right now, so and how I understand it better. So is really a fixed mindset. You have this external defined ideal that is unrealistic.
Mhm.
Um, and it's about performance. It's performance driven.
Mhm.
Whereas healthy striving, because we all want to do excellent care and medicine, right? Um,
Mhm.
is more of a growth mindset and this internally derived motivation and seeing it as mastery driven. Like, I just want to get better. and better and better. And so it's not like I'm missing something. It's not like I'm failing or missing the mark. It's like I'm growing and better, right? And that to me is the biggest difference.
And then the feedback you're looking for is different too. Instead of you did a great job, you're looking for, okay, tell me what can I do next time to make it even better for you?
Yes, exactly. It's so much easier. It's so much easier to learn and grow. And then it makes it easier for you to recognize how to give feedback and, coach residents to receive the feedback in the way you intended, right? So
yeah. What about within the clinical day with your patients charting, how the residents were charting? Did you take back any of that, like edit their notes, like that sort of thing? Is that part of perfectionism?
so yes and no. I think efficiency was I would probably list efficiency as a strength of mine. So I think I hit the mark that I wanted to hit for my note. I am by no means an English or grammar, guru, but and so I think I didn't hold myself to some crazy standard there. I'm just like, as long as I made it clear, I think I didn't really take the perfection in my notes, but I see that a lot when I'm coaching. And especially those who really, really are sticklers for all the grammatical rules and really enjoy prose. And some of it's so beautiful. Like one person was like, I just want I want to honor the story of the person in front of me. And I just thought that was really beautiful. And it was driving her to write a lot of extra time, right?
Yeah, yes, that's right. So if we place honor with words within the script of that note, then we can see how this can trip us up. For sure.
Yeah, for sure.
And how can we honor that person with less words, perhaps?
Yes, yes, exactly.
Honor the story with less words. Good. Okay. Checking boxes, though. So the checking boxes came in as one of those pieces where you were not willing to have it anything less than your standard.
Yeah, no, that's for sure. And so definitely ties perfectionism into there. And, I think I've done that my whole life. And I had never gotten to a point where I couldn't get the check boxes done. And so it was having all these roles and all these responsibilities that frankly were too many to get done in one day for any human being. I had never been in that situation before. And so it's just like, I have to check every box.
Yeah.
So part of it was ego driven. Like, I'm not going to become one of those people that, drops the ball.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it was really interesting in trying to hit that and realizing you can only keep up with so much.
Yes, you can. That's right. Every role that we have has a time commitment per day, per month, per year, whatever it looks like. And you are a human.
It turns out, yes.
So important to remember. I'm fascinated that you kept the teaching, even though that appeared to be the thing that took you so much additional time, like that extraneous time of getting the PowerPoint right and making sure my presentation is perfect. Like that sounds excruciating. And yet that's the one you stayed. You're like, I'm leaving clinical mostly because I want that.
Yeah, it's because I get so much joy from that. I love taking complex things, breaking, like really like filling in my own knowledge gaps, right? Like if I were to explain this, what's the parts that I don't understand? And so filling in my own gaps and then trying to give it back in a way that makes sense for a family physician, right? And because we've all had those some specialists that come in and they give this incredible talk and you're like, man, they are smart. And then you leave and you're like, okay, but what did I take away from that other than they're really, really smart and I should just send people to them, right? And then we've also had the opposite, like, there was an ophthalmologist when I was a resident who came and said, we're going to cover red eye. And he'd show a slide and he'd look at us. he'd be like, yeah, just send this one to me. Like, he was just so afraid to teach us anything because he's so afraid that we were so inept that we could not handle how to differentiate one red eye from another, that he taught us absolutely nothing. And so I think it was a passion of mine to like, how do we teach family medicine docs to be family medicine docs? You're going to get a lot of headaches. You're going to get a lot of abdominal pain. Like, what makes the outliers? How do you approach it? Like, I get a lot of joy from that.
Yeah, you can hear the passion in you as you start to unravel that for us. So then tell us where the coaching piece came in. How did you end up teaching the joy in family medicine to residents and attendings?
Well, the one part that happened after burnout was I joined a family medicine practice that was owned by a husband and wife who had these luxuriously long 30-minute appointments for their patients. If it was a female physical, we got 40 minutes. Acute care patients, still 30 minutes, right? And so all of a sudden I had this like amazing systems change. And within that, I was like, you know what? This is a chance to reinvent how I do this, because I would not chart when I was for faculty. I would not chart. I would chart during my admin time or during my lunchtime, and I did not chart during clinic time. And I was like, I'm going to change that now, because I had a good friend who always charted right after every patient. And I'm like, this is my opportunity to reinvent myself, right? And so I started doing that and seeing that 30 minutes is, I have at least 5 minutes to do every note. That means 25 minutes for the patient, right? So I just kind of reset my mind of what that appointment meant. And so I rediscovered joy in family medicine first. And a lot of that was perfectionism. And I don't know if you know Dr. Sasha Shilcutt. She was at the time starting, she had a Facebook group, and then she had the Brave Enough Conference, which is a women physicians conference. And I started going there and hearing things there about unhealthy perfectionism and, intentionally cultivating friendships and just things that I had never considered, and started piecing together what had happened during my time as core faculty, kind of seeing it in a new light, kind of rewriting the narrative I told about myself, right? And gosh, so I was healing from enjoying being back with patients and having time to see them, and not taking work home again. At the same time, was also discovering and learning a lot of the unhealthy traits or characteristics or approaches that I had used.
Yeah, very
So
interesting.
from there,
yes,
then I hired Dr. Ali Novitsky to be my career coach, because I knew I was missing like all that other stuff, the teaching, right? And I was still filling in at the residency, but I was like, residents are like, they're my people, and I say that in an affectionate way, not as a paternalistic way, right? But I like, what could that look like? And she, like, in talking with her, it was just like a light bulb moment. She was like, you love this and this and this and this and this. How would they combine together? And I was like, could become a coach. And so I went to train, got my certification, and started working on how this would work in family medicine residencies. And it wasn't long before I started doing that, I realized, how can I take this to the residents without taking something similar and meeting the faculty where they are, so they don't go through what I went through?
Yeah. So what are the types of things that you're helping teach us or noticing about the physicians that are coming into your sphere?
There's so much fun stuff to notice. Like, one is like the current like generation of residents, I will say, are much more, they have a greater emotional intelligence on average than, like, say, my generation when I was going through residency. And a lot of them are ahead of the curve on some of these ideas. And because of that, their frustration quotient is quite high because they see how things, quote, should be, right? And how things are. They see that gap. Whereas when I was a resident, I didn't question them. Like, of course, we don't count hours. I mean, it was before work hour rules, so we didn't count hours. Like, I would never thought, what do you mean? 90 hours is too much for a human to, I wouldn't have never questioned it. But they have they have a better take on life. And because of that, it drives their frustrations a lot of times. When they see the systems, they see the injustices, and then so how to navigate, like, how do you control what you can control? How do you accept the things you cannot control? How do you find ability to influence when you can, in a way that can be heard? When do you decide, I just don't have the bandwidth right now for this? This season is not for that, right? Like, so coaching around all of those things, in addition to the unhealthy perfectionism and all the things that I learned the hard way.
Yeah. Yes. I liked your the way that you said boundaries without saying boundaries.
Yeah.
Do you have time for this in this season?
Right.
I think that's one of the typical things I hear about when you're offered these roles and positions, and it feels like a win because you're being offered it. So clearly somebody appreciates, acknowledges, notices, thinks that you're good enough for, and then where am I going to fit that?
Right. Right. And, and I heard talking about Sasha, this is one of the things she said that struck me so hard is you're going to have to get used to disappointing really good people. It was the really good people part that hit me. I was like, wait, I got to disappoint really good people? Like, if you're going to protect the most important things, then even good things and good people, if without good boundaries, can threaten the most important things, right? And so, yeah, I loved that phrase, and I use that often now.
Yes, that's so important. So if you had a resident or a faculty who are in that place where you were, pointing the finger, saying what's wrong, not interacting with their peers, showing signs of burnout, they're noticing themselves, feeling like they can't check the boxes because they've got too many boxes now. What are your top things that you would take them to? Where would you get them to start?
I would start with, have you had a good night's sleep? Because before you start doing much contemplation and reflection, being in a good, well-rested place. So maybe you need a couple of days, weekend, a week away to rest, to get to the place where you can actually think, right? And I would encourage that gratefulness practice to reset that negativity bias, to kind of counterbalance it just a little bit. Because when you start doing it in your first few days, you can't come up with 3 good things, but now your brain's on task and it will start looking. So I think that's a really healthy thing. And then the third thing is defining, if we put in the center of that circle, what are the most important things to you, for your family, for your team? Like, what are those? And then what boundaries are you willing to put up to protect the most important things? And that often means also, what are you taking off of your plate that you have, or what are you going to lower your standard, right?
Yeah. And what about that sneaky external validation piece, though?
Oh, yeah. I think, external validation, having to really focus on your strengths, I think, is a great way to start to combat that. Because I think in the middle of all that negativity, it's easy to forget our strengths. And so we're just looking for somebody else to tell us we're doing something good. And so, the VIA character strengths online is free. Ask your friends and family, what are the things that I do well? Asking your medical assistant, colleagues, what are the things that you see that I do well? Start to like really own your strengths, because I think then you can start to, number one, appreciate them. Because
Mm-hmm.
when you appreciate your strengths, you're needing less. But the other part is really knowing your why. Because I'm just going to tell you, once you have that most important things, what's your why? What are your defined purpose? You don't care as much what they think, right? Um, so I think that's a really important piece of it.
Yeah. Yeah. Because if you're holding on to what's important and guarding that, when your patients say, but you're different,
Yeah.
you start showing up differently, because maybe you are going to defer that next thing till next time because you need to get to the thing that's most important that's on your plate at 4:00. And your
Yeah.
patient says you're different and you're like, yep,
Yep. And it's
without
true.
the, oh, I'm disappointing them.
Right. It's, just it's really healthy to realize that I am going to disappoint some people, and just kind of getting to a point of accepting that that will happen.
Mm,
And some people aren't going to like me, and that's okay. And some people are just going to be wrong about me. And you know what? That's their business and not mine.
mm,
Right. Um, and that kind of really goes to the mindset piece. And I haven't highlighted it as much as I spend time coaching around it. But when we let our minds, and you know this, and your listeners know this because you talk about it all the time, right? But like when we let our minds and our thoughts go unchecked, seemingly innocent little thoughts cross over and can have big impacts,
mm,
right? I had one resident, we were kind of combing through things, and this sneaky little thought that kind of doesn't seem really positive, but didn't seem that bad, was, I don't belong.
mm,
But what that thought led her to was a lot of shame. And from that shame came a lot of comparison to look at, to reinforce that she didn't belong. It led her to thinking, how can I leave clinical medicine?
mm,
But when you strip back away, it's like, what do you love about your job? She loves giving care to her patients. But that little sneaky thought, I don't belong, was about to send her in a direction that she did not really want to go down, right? And so really tuning into what you're allowing to run around in your own brain.
mm.
And one of my friends, Megan Zane, she uses the term thought bouncer, kind of like a bouncer at a bar, right? She's like, you need to have a thought bouncer up there. I'm like, oh, nope, no, I see you, out of here. Right. And I know that, in a practical stance, that it's not always that easy, but just like, I think tuning in is really important. And then really being intentional with what you allow your mind to dwell on.
Mm. Yeah, so powerful. Thank you. I think that's very helpful. So where do people find you if they're wanting to learn more about you and what you do?
Oh, my website is joyinfamilymedicine.com, and you can contact me on there and read about different programs. I have a blog that I put as much value out into the world as I can, that I hope is mainly targeted towards family medicine faculty and family medicine residents. But I think hopefully there's a lot of value to be found, even if you're not ready to partner with your own coach.
Yeah. And anything that you would like to end on, anything we didn't discuss that you'd like to say?
I think one of the things that you brought up in my group a few weeks ago that resonated, I just want to highlight here again, because it was so powerful. I had people emailing me a couple of days later to tell me how helpful it was. And you just gently took them from um, getting to a place of accepting that this is how primary care is working in the shortage in these complex patients. And how do we redefine our ideal with what we have? That was so powerful for so many people. So I'm going to highlight your teaching because it was brilliant.
Got it. Okay. And so I'll pad it out a little bit because some people were at that conversation. So
Yes.
ideally, we'd love to spend a half a day with our patient, right? What is the ideal, right? Well, how would we love to deliver patient care? And I think you almost had that with those half an hour visits compared to what you'd been given before. And then what are we given? 15 minutes for whatever reason. It may not be 15 minutes for you. You know what I mean? Like what is your actual reality? And what does it look like to do medicine that's different to our ideal, right? So you've got the ideal, how you would prefer to practice. And then now what, when we're given 15 minutes? Where do we start to use our expertise in the best possible way and know that it's not your ideal. It's not how you would prefer to do it. It is contributing to many of us with the trauma of medicine because we can't deliver care in the way that we would prefer to. And that's heartbreaking in itself. And then how do we start to redefine ourselves? What does our identity look like? Because previously we might have held the ideal that I'm here for every problem, for every one of my patients at all times, ideally. But ideal medicine is not waiting for me for 4 weeks. That's not good medicine either. So how do we now help our patients advocate for themselves within the system that they find themselves? So we're in this system, but they are too, and helping them and us try and figure it out. So yeah, thank you for bringing that forward.
Yeah, so good.
Yeah, because I think this is the system we want to change. And we're so proud of the people who are in there fighting for and bringing their voices towards change. And in the meantime, what do we do next? Yeah. Thank you. Thank you for a great conversation. I think that our listeners are going to love hearing your perspective on these as well. So appreciate you.
Thank you, Sarah.
Have a great week, everybody. Thank you for being part of the Sustainable Clinical Medicine podcast. If you'd like to learn more or join us to help you get home with today's work done, go to chartingcoach.ca. There you'll find all the information on the premier Lifetime Access Charting Champions program that is helping physicians get home with today's work done, with all the proven tools, support, and community you need to create time for your life outside of medicine. We would love to see you there. Until next time, thanks for listening.